Our clients are owner-managed businesses. We look to build long-term relationships with our clients and try to help them plan their businesses well beyond the next year or so, and make sure that we can, to the best of our ability, help them be in a good position to weather any storms which come along, whether that be coronavirus or any other such event. What's most important to us is teamwork. No one person has the right answer, and when we advise people, there are often lots of options. So we think to get the best results for that relevant client, we spend time discussing the issues with them and trying to understand what the ultimate outcome could or should be. Our tagline is bringing talented people together to achieve exceptional outcomes, and having seen the attendee list today, I'm sure we'll be able to do that. Just realised I should be using the slides, so I will do that. There we go. I'm going to try to be relatively brief, but there is just so much to cover at the moment. And a lot of what I will say is really just a snapshot of some of the issues to try to get you thinking. One upshot of COVID-19 is that lawyers, accountants, and all sorts of other people have just been churning out guidance note after guidance note. So there is plenty for you to read out there. And if there are any issues which people want to cover off in more detail, I'll be very happy to have offline discussions with you. I also think Mark's already mentioned it, but there's a chat box, so do pop in questions there and I'll try to answer those as we go along or after Mark has done his bit. Before I sort of get into the detail of all of this, I just wanted to give you a quick bit about my background. I trained at the international law firm Clyde & Co, where I spent 6 months in Dubai working on corporate transactions. I then qualified and practiced employment law for 2.5 years at Clyde & Co. I moved to White & Case, which is a leading US law firm, which turned over $2 billion in 2018. And whilst there, I worked within the corporate team on a huge array of transactions, ranging from sort of the Aramco IPO to corporate rescues, unsecured debt, and various things like that. I then saw the light, I got married, and I moved back to Hampshire, where I now live. And with a former colleague from Clyde & Co, Max Hope, we bought Phillips in 2018. Phillips was established by my dad and others in the year I was born. I now take the lead on the majority of leadership issues, and with lots of help from the existing team, we've overhauled the IT, added new operating procedures, brought in a variety of new clients, and in February this year, we merged with Brainchase Coles and carried out a complete office refit. And on the 6th of March, I was thrilled. We had everyone in one office. And by the end of March, we were spread out across Hampshire and beyond, thanks to COVID. It's against this background that I wanted to share with you some of my learnings over the past few months, things for you to think about from a legal perspective, but also a commercial one. As I already mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of slides, so do forgive me if I forget to use them. But there are 3 main areas which I'm going to cover. One is reopening your workplace. The second is restructuring your workforce, and the third is just reviewing your business. So there we go. Failing to use my slides, that's the content which we'll be covering before Mark takes over. So reopening the workplace, risk assessment. You have to do this. It's really not an option, and all the government guidance state is very clear on this. What a risk assessment allows you to do is demonstrate that you have placed objectively reasonable procedures to ensure the health and safety and welfare of your employees during the coronavirus pandemic. Completing a risk assessment also allows you to comply with your continuing legal obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, and that is the one bit of legislation I'm going to quote at you today. So I hope it wasn't too much. If you have less than 5 employees, then there's no obligation on you to produce a formal written risk assessment. And for anyone with more than 5 employees, you do need to have something written down. But our recommendation, possibly because we're lawyers who like paper trails, but you should all write something down. Make sure you've got it in writing. It's suggested by the government that the risk assessment is shared with your employees and, if possible, be published on your website. I think that final point of sort of publishing it on your website, I'm not particularly sure on, and I think it rather depends on the type of business you have. If you've got a business where lots of people will be coming through the door, lots of customers, then I think actually that is really important, because you want to be giving your customers and your consumers that confidence to come to you. But does that need to be the full risk assessment? Is it a statement on your website explaining what you've been doing? I think that's possibly better and more helpful to someone than just having this is the risk, this is what we've done. The guidance goes on to state that if you have more than 50 employees, you do actually just need to share it with them. They have also produced a poster which you can print off, sign, and date to confirm that you've complied with all the guidance, which will help your staff know that you've carried out the process. When I started to discuss with our operations manager the risk assessment for our office, two things were quite apparent. One, there was no risk assessment for COVID-19 provided by the government or the health and safety executive. They just said you need to do one. The other was that communication with staff was going to be key when carrying out the process. Now, if anyone is looking for a risk assessment and they haven't done one, I've now got one which I can share with you, our template. And equally, I have found some free ones online. The best one I've found is from the Health and Safety Executive of Northern Ireland, who've actually produced one. And I think having a base or an example of what someone else has done should save you some time and help you think about the risks a bit more. The second point is the communication with your staff, and that's something which will run through everything I mentioned today, because I think it's really important. Risk assessments are a way to get your staff comfortable with coming back into your workplace. You should be speaking to them as part of the risk assessment process. Ask them if they have any concerns or suggestions as to how things could be done. When I messaged my colleagues and asked them what they thought, were there any issues they had, they were really pleased actually that I was taking the time to ask their views and came back with ideas which I hadn't thought about. So I really recommend doing that. You then, as you're carrying out your risk assessment, get some oddities. Do you prop open your fire doors so that there's less hand contact on the door handles? Yes, from a COVID perspective, that seems really sensible. But then you start thinking about fire. Do you want it ripping through your building? Well, of course not. So what's the safest thing to do? Well, it's hard to know, and I think it depends on the environment you're working in. In an office environment, it's probably okay to leave the doors open during the working day, provided that there's something in place to make sure the last person who leaves closes all the doors. In a factory environment, I'd have thought it's less sensible. These are decisions which we're having to take every day, and humans aren't very good at risk and assessing it. I find myself jumping into a road to avoid a person on a pavement and stay 2 meters apart from them, which in my view, jumping in the road is going to be more dangerous if I get hit by a car than the likelihood of catching coronavirus by quickly walking past someone. Now, each person has to understand their own level of risk, and you need to think about it. But talk to people as well, see what their views are, because it's only, I think, by talking through that you'll work out what's the safest procedure. So we published our risk assessment. We then also published an operating procedure for the office. We bought more hand sanitizers, more antibacterial wipes than I could ever imagine. We put tape down. We're looking at one-way systems for when more people come back in the office. Various posters have gone up, although we are yet to spend money on the stay 2 meters apart, because it seems to me, as on the Today programme this morning, the advice is likely to change of that. And I fear a lot of money will have been wasted on all the stay 2 meter apart signs, which will change to stay 1.5 meter, 1 meter apart. So maybe hold back on that if you haven't spent the money yet. So I did the risk assessment and thought, great, that's all done. But then I realized it wasn't really. Risk assessments are not a one-off. Risk changes, so you need to keep evaluating them and amending them. We at Phillips have tried to get into the habit of checking in with people on a bi-weekly basis to see if any issues have arisen. And we're also keeping an eye on any guidance which comes from the government. As and when more people come back into the workplace, you also will need to think about your operating procedures, because it's going to be harder to social distance with people if you've got more people in the office. At the moment, we have got a workforce of normally 70 to 80 people and about 7 or 8 in the office. That's quite easy to social distance. If we're back at 40, 50, it suddenly becomes a lot harder. My final point on risk assessments, and without trying to be too melodramatic, I do want to emphasize they're really, really important. If you fail to do a risk assessment, then someone becomes infected with COVID-19. This infection is traced back to your workplace, and you haven't done anything to prevent the transmission. You, as directors, could potentially be liable for corporate manslaughter. And whilst this may seem far-fetched, I really don't think it's worth having sleepless nights worrying about it, rather than giving a risk assessment a few hours of your time and the attention it deserves. So next point is face coverings, which we've had a surprising number of questions about over the past couple of weeks. At the moment, they are not compulsory. There's no obligation on you to be providing them. Slight caveat to that is if people cannot socially distance, then I think you should be thinking about providing some sort of face coverings. Face coverings doesn't mean masks, and the guidance at the moment is that the masks should not be used, and they should be kept for the NHS, care workers, and those who really need them. If someone does want to wear a face covering, that's their own choice, and you shouldn't try to put them off doing so. But if they are going to, there's actually a surprising number of points which you should be thinking about when wearing them to make them safe to wear. And the government guidance sets this out. So I'd recommend, if anyone does want to wear them, digging that guidance out. I can always send it to you, and just checking that people are wearing them properly and reminding people and asking them to do so. Another point, which is really actually quite complicated, and the topic which could cover at least an hour, is what happens if someone doesn't want to come back to work because they don't feel safe. They're worried about coronavirus and they think it's too risky for them to do so. Well, whether it's safe for them or not is a subjective decision. It's not objective, it's based on that individual person and their evaluation of risk. So it will change whether it's safe for someone to come back to work depending on each individual employee which you have. You should not really be forcing people back into the workplace. You just try to speak to them to try to work out what their concerns are and see if there are any ways of alleviating them. Just because 9 out of 10 people are happy to return, that doesn't mean that the one person who doesn't want to return is wrong. I think the other thing to remember, despite seeing all the shops reopening this week and things starting to feel a bit more normal, is that the guidance is still to work at home wherever possible. So you should, as business owners, be facilitating this. If you refuse to make adjustments, you can also get yourself into issues of disability discrimination. There are potential whistleblowing and health and safety concerns, because if someone raises concerns about working and the safety of doing so, you subsequently dismiss them, then their dismissal could be automatically deemed unfair. So I suppose what I come back to here is communication. The more you talk to people, the more you should be able to try and find a solution with them. Can they work different hours when the office is less busy or workplace? Work in a meeting room? Be provided with some PPE? There are lots of options, and an employment tribunal would expect to see evidence of employers working with their employees to come up with solutions. These are, and I'm going to use the phrase, completely unprecedented times. It's an awful phrase, I know, but it is true. And the law hasn't been written to cover off every eventuality which will arise during a pandemic. So you can't make the law fit into each solution. So talk to people, try to reach amicable solutions, and use your common sense. If you can't reach a solution with someone, then there are options which you can consider: placing them on unpaid leave, putting them on sick pay, or if they've been furloughed, maybe they could go back on furlough, although that will only be available till the 31st of October. Of course, I'm going to say this, but these are really complicated issues here. So I would highly recommend you see legal advice if you have this type of issue arising, preferably from Phillips, but there are plenty of other people there who can help you. The fourth point, which I just want to cover off on reopening the workplace, is getting your furloughers back to work. And I want you to cast your mind back to what it was like returning to school after those long summer holidays. Can you remember where you're supposed to sit? Can you remember how to write? Where even is the school? Will the people who you haven't seen all summer remember who you are? And I would have thought that for anyone returning from furlough, they'll be having similar thoughts, although I do hope that they'll be able to remember how to write. Their confidence might be down. So think about that. Will they remember what their password is? Do you have someone in place to help them? Have you got training in place to remind them of how to use your systems? Will there be someone with available to have a meeting with them and make sure that they feel welcome when they return? If they're working from home, will they have the relevant equipment from day one? I know all of this seems simple, but it's so easy to forget when you're focusing on running the business, keeping things going. If you have 10 people returning on one day, none of them can remember their password, and the IT guy's on holiday, it could take a day or even a couple of hours, but that cumulative time to get everyone online means you lose a day, 2, 3 of work, and that's probably something which you can't afford right now. So really plan their return and think it through. I also think you need to think about how those people returning will affect those who have worked during the period. People coming back might say that furlough was brilliant. The weather's been fantastic. It was life-changing. They got to spend lots of time with their kids. It was really easy schooling everyone because they had all this time, which is really great for them. And we shouldn't criticize them for it. But it might be rubbing salt in the wound for some of those who have been working really hard in this time with less resource and just thinking, well, really, guys, actually, I've been working quite hard. So is there some type of messaging which you can send to the people returning just to be sensitive of those at work? So I hope that bit's been helpful. And now we're going to talk, if I move the slide on, about restructuring the workforce. And I suppose what I really mean here is redundancies and looking at what you need in your workforce, because working patterns have changed over the last 3 months, and the cash flow coming into your business has probably changed. So you're probably considering this more than you've done in the last few years. Here I'm going to cover off basic redundancy laws, whether you can use the furlough scheme for redundancies, how to carry out the redundancies in this sort of weird environment, and then I'll just touch on the introduction of the part-time slash flexible furlough. So basic redundancy law, and this part's a bit techie, so I do apologise. If someone has less than 2 years service, then they do not have protection from unfair dismissal, and it's relatively easy to terminate their employment, provided that there are no discrimination or whistleblowing issues. If someone has more than 2 years service, you need a fair reason to terminate their employment, and you must follow a fair procedure, and a fair reason is redundancy. What is important to remember is that a person is not redundant, rather it's their role, and as a result of that role being redundant, that person's employment is terminated. You therefore need to review what roles you have, what roles are going to be redundant, and then you carry out a selection criteria to identify those who are potentially at risk. Those who are at risk should be consulted with, and an open mind should be kept at all times during the consultation. You may need to pool people across your business depending on their relevant skill set. So someone who might work in one department has got the skills which could be done in another department. So think widely and fairly. For individual consultations, which is when you're making 19 or less people redundant, we'd normally expect the process to take about 2 weeks. If you need to collectively consult, which applies when you're proposing to make 20 or more people redundant in a 90-day period, the period for consultation is 30 days, and this is extended to 45 days if more than 100 people are redundant. There's also an HR1 form which you need to submit to the Secretary of State for Business. I should also emphasise that no decision should be taken in regard to whether or not a role is redundant until the consultation process has come to an end. Unsurprisingly, as a lawyer, I'm going to tell you that there's a lot more to redundancies than what I've just explained, but I wanted to give you an idea of the timeframes so that you can consider the steps you need to take if you're looking at streamlining your workforce whilst possibly taking advantage of the furlough scheme. So, can we use the furlough scheme for redundancies? Now, I'm sure you're all aware that this is a scheme which has been in place since March 2020, and it's been a big relief for many employers and has avoided mass redundancies. It's actually quite an extraordinary scheme and has been very generous. One of my colleagues was saying that I must now have to support the Tory government because of such a generous scheme. And I did rather point out that I think it's almost a Marxist chancellor we've got. It's just the sheer generosity of the scheme. As of August, employers will have to contribute more, which leads to an increase in the likelihood of redundancies taking place, as more employers can't afford to pay the salaries or even the part contributions which they need to. And we've spoken to some people at the CAB, and they're gearing up for a huge number of inquiries over the next few weeks and sort of getting their advisors on board. And the reason this will happen in the next couple of weeks is that employers are likely to want to use the furlough scheme to help pay the cost of the notice periods which people have. And I think that's why you saw in May there was a big push for the Chancellor to say what's happening with this scheme, because of the sort of the time frame it takes to carry out the redundancies. And I actually wrote to my MP about this because I thought it was really important that employers need that certainty when we're planning in these difficult times. So the big question, can you use the furlough scheme to pay notice periods? And there's a really big health warning on my answer to this. The guidance from HMRC does not say that you cannot use the scheme, but it's guidance. It's just that, and it's subject to change. I think we're on version 14 of the guidance for the furlough scheme. Certain commentators and newspapers, including The Guardian, which I'm an avid reader of, have said that this goes against the purpose of the scheme. If you make people redundant, you shouldn't be able to claim. I don't actually agree with this, because if you as an employer cannot take all your employees back to work when the scheme comes to an end, and if you have to make redundancies, but you use the scheme to fund the notice periods of those made redundant, and this allows you to make less drastic cuts, less drastic redundancies, or even survive, then I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think that was the purpose of the scheme, which was to help employers through this process and to reduce the number of redundancies. It wasn't to prevent all redundancies, but that's my personal view, and others might disagree. As an employer, I think you need to weigh up the risks of using the scheme. Do you make people redundant now? Use the money from the scheme when you might actually desperately just need that to come into your business, but you have the potential risk of needing to pay it back or not being able to claim. Alternatively, you don't make people redundant. You use the furlough scheme all the way up till October, and then you just have to cover the cost of redundancies at a later date. That just builds in more costs at a later time if you need to do it now. It seems appropriate for me that you would do so now, or you just make the people redundant and you don't claim. It's up to you. Your risk appetite will depend on your current circumstances and the level of cash you have in your business. My gut feeling, which may well be wrong, is that HMRC will not prevent employers from using furlough to pay notice periods, because I think, given all the chatter in the background, they would have told us before now if that was the case. And I also think the administration of auditing all of the claims which are made for furlough will be huge and may cost more in terms of doing that than the salaries and reclaim which they would be able to get. The next point is, how do you carry out redundancies at the moment? In normal times, you would likely get everyone together and have a meeting to explain what's happening and the reasons for the redundancies. This process has not changed, but it's just the mechanics of how you deliver it which has. You need to think as to whether you have a space in your workplace where all can attend and socially distance. If you do not, then think about using Zoom or Teams or something similar. If you are going to have a virtual meeting, you need to check all those who need to attend have access to those facilities. If they don't, how are you going to get the message to them? Is it a case of just calling them straight after the meeting and updating them? My view when it comes to redundancy process is that honesty and openness and explain to people why the changes have to be made is key. Very few employers want to make redundancies. It's horrible. It keeps you up at night. On the day, you cannot really focus on anything else. I think you should make sure to people that redundancies are actions of last resort. By describing the effects of the lockdown on the business, people understand more. I think your messaging will be easier if you've shown clear leadership, which shows that the first port of call was not redundancies. Did the senior management team take pay cuts? When carrying out your selection criteria, you need to ensure that those on furlough leave are not put at disadvantage. And where possible, two people should be involved in the selection criteria for each employee. Your consultation process will need to be done remotely or in a socially distanced manner. So you need to consider how those are done and recorded. Are you using Zoom for a multiple meeting, which will cut it off at 40 minutes? That won't look that great. So maybe pay that subscription so more people can join. If you need to have an election for representatives, which would be the case for collective consultation, how will this take place? Think these through before you start the process. I would suggest that you seek voluntary redundancies before commencing any sort of formal process. I think this period, lots of people have spent time at home and their thought process will have changed. So someone who might not have wanted to retire might have changed that thought process, or they will want to go off and do something else. You also need to think about whether you can afford to enhance the statutory redundancy payments, which could make people more keen. These are all really hard, complicated decisions which need to be thought out. I think if you rush it, your employers will see through this and be less receptive. If you take time and empathize with employees, I think you'll find the process easier. And one thing I always say to clients is imagine how you would feel if you were receiving the message. And I think you should tailor your communications based on that. It can make the whole process a lot easier. When making these announcements as well, I think you need to think about the people who are going to remain within your workforce. If you're saying things are tough, you're making people redundant, there are no bonuses or pay rises for the foreseeable future, but then you go on a dream holiday, which with the quarantine rules is unlikely right now, but that type of action will cause significant issues for the level of trust within your business. You also want to reassure people that your business is a steady ship and a good place to work with a future career path. Part-time furlough or flexible furlough. This has been introduced from the 1st of July, and I think it's a welcome relief for many employers, and it will allow you to have employees back in the business on a part-time basis. And I think it's particularly useful as your cash flow starts to build back up. You can have some people working half their normal hours, for example, and be able to receive compensation under the furlough scheme, and the remaining 50% of the hours you'd get assistance from the furlough scheme. The government guidance has issued guidance with worked examples, which I'd recommend reading. There are quite a lot of complicated aspects to this, and various people require further clarity from the government. One important thing to remember is you still need to get people's written agreement, and they're now saying you need a written agreement, whereas previously you just had to record what's happening in writing. So those are the type of inconsistencies which people are seeking those clarifications on. There's no minimum period which you need to be on furlough for, as was the case prior to the 1st of July when you had those 3 consecutive weeks. To be eligible for flexible furlough, you must have been furloughed before the 1st of July. The exception to this is if you've been on family leave, i.e. maternity or shared parental leave, then you may be furloughed on your return, provided that the employer has already taken advantage of the scheme with other employees. If you want more information, we do have a note on this, which I can circulate on that. The final substantive area, which I just wanted to cover off, is just reviewing your business practices and the future. I appreciate that the 2 areas which we've discussed so far have been rather employment and people heavy. So in an attempt to showcase some of our expertise in commercial and corporate areas, I thought I'd mention my thoughts on these. And the first thing I think to think about is, what have you liked about lockdown and the way your business is run? In our business, it's meant that the naysayers of technology have finally had to embrace it and get on with it. They haven't had a choice. We're going to be able to introduce flexible working in a way none of us ever considered. The idea that support staff can work from home when they need it. I think we've learned to trust people more as well. People have just got on. They've really dug in and helped us out. We've spoken much more about mental health, which I think is great. And we've also looked at other revenue streams. We've been going out and getting more work. We're now reviewing our processes to think about how we can make these changes permanent, or at least adapt our ways. And I think it's worth just spending some time just writing down everything which you've enjoyed and then working out how you make them permanent. Make sure that people don't slip back into the old ways. I read a book about how to run businesses once, and it was saying that you're the people who need to lead from the front. That's not a surprise. But then it mentioned this elastic band, and that each time you try to introduce change, everyone sort of takes it, but then we have this elastic band which slowly pulls ourselves back to where we were. So you constantly need to be making that until that change becomes permanent, which takes a lot longer than any of us anticipate. Suppliers and procurement. How hot have you been on reviewing these over the years? Many of us, whether it's in our personal lives or business lives, you see a great deal to begin with and you sign up and you think it's good, but you don't go back when it comes to the end. You don't review and negotiate those terms. But I think this is an ideal time to start those negotiations and make sure you're getting the best deal possible. Money might be tighter than normal, so if you can find a better deal, that can really help with your revenue and cash flow coming into the business. I also think you'll find that suppliers are a bit more flexible at the moment because they're desperate to keep their business. Other thing to look at is, do you have any long-term contracts which you want to get out of? If so, there might be some sort of clause in there which allows you to do so. It's worth reviewing these and then looking at the arguments which could be made to get out of those contracts, and we at Phillips could help you with that. Negotiate, looking at your rental, your commercial property. That area in our business is quite busy at the moment, where you've got tenants and potential tenants trying to renegotiate their terms, and landlords having to weigh up, is it best to give holidays versus not having a tenant at all? I also think you need to think about the people you supply to. Do you have a key customer who might be at risk due to the economic impact of the pandemic? If so, can you get more work from other clients or new clients to reduce your reliability on that particular key customer? Equally, think about what stock you might have at other people's premises. If you do have lots of stock with people which hasn't been paid for, what do your terms and conditions say about those? Are you able to go back and get them if they went bust? Can you reclaim the stock if they look like they're in danger? These are the type of things which I think you should be thinking about now. Final point I want to cover on this topic is just your business plan and the potential exits which some of you might be thinking about. If you've been anything like me over the last few weeks, you've been focused on getting through lockdown and emerging intact. This has been somewhat all-consuming. At times it's been exhilarating, at other times it's been terrifying. And whilst we've been focusing on cash flow, I'm not sure we've actually been looking at our long-term business plan in sufficient detail. The world has changed, and I think those businesses which adapt quickly will be the ones to benefit from the recovery as and when it happens. Fantastic example of this is a client of mine who had a classroom-based product. They had to go into schools to demonstrate it, they'd carry out sessions, and then the teachers would take on the product. They haven't been able to do that in the past 3 months. So they have moved everything online. They've now got a subscription-based model, and it looks like they're going to make a lot more money with this than the previous model. So are there any ways which your business can adapt to widen your customer base or increase your revenue streams? I then think you need to think, well, where do I want to be in a few years' time? Because again, the pandemic might have changed that thought process. For some of you, you might just think, actually, I'm done. This has been horrible. I just want to get out. It's been too bruising and I want to sell and move on. But others of you might be thinking, I do want to sell, but will I get enough for the business? Will there be enough for me to live on? And that's what Mark's going to be touching on. Are there buyers out there who'll buy my business? And I think this is where you just need to think things through with some clever succession planning, and you can structure your exit in a certain way that some of your managers could come on and take ownership and become the future owners, which would work well for you, and you'd be able to get the money out of your business. If you don't want to exit and you want to grow your business, can you use some of the schemes out there to provide liquidity to your business and invest in it? Equally, I think you'll find there's quite a lot of people with money out there who are unsure about putting money in the stock market, and they could be your EIS investors, for example, and they might find you more interesting at the moment. And the other thing, interest rates are extraordinarily low, so money is cheap. Can you take advantage of that? Can you put the loans in place to help you grow? What about your competitors? Have they been badly prepared for this? Are they in a bad position? Could you buy some of them out? Could you get some of their customers? With situations like Corona, there are always opportunities. And I think it's just about thinking it through and making sure you're in the right position to take advantage. One thing I get really excited about is talking to people about their businesses and what could be done, different ideas. So if you want to talk about it, I'd be really happy to. But there's lots of people out there who will. Your accountants who should have been in touch over the past couple of months checking in. What about your IFAs, your business mentors? These are people who get excited as well. So get out there, get talking to people and work out ways which you can help your business. So there's two final points which I just wanted to cover off. One is sort of cash flow and finance, and then one is just a question which I want to leave with you. 2 points on the cash flow and finance. One is the income which you're receiving from the government under various grants or the furlough scheme. That will still be taxable in the vast majority of cases. So you just need to remember that. Speak to your accountant about your tax and how that can be planned as well. There are lots of reliefs out there. And I've listened to some quite interesting tax talks recently. Some of it's really complicated, but there are lots of people who can help you with that. And then your cash flow. Well, the government support has been great. Maybe you haven't paid your VAT, maybe you haven't paid your PAYE. And that means your bank balance is looking really healthy, surprisingly, at the moment. But when you get down into it, actually, there's a lot of debt there and you owe a lot of money to people. So I think you need to have a plan of how you're going to pay off that money, work that through your cash flow. But don't pay it back is kind of my suggestion until you really have to. What happens if there's a cash flow bump along the road? September might be quite difficult after the normal summer lull. So my tip is to set up a separate bank account where you start squirreling away money which you need to pay off your VAT, maybe your corona interruption business loan. So you have that money there which you can use if you need to. Hopefully you won't, and it gives your actual bank balance a more realistic amount of what you've got in. Keep that money in your bank account. Don't give it to HMRC because they'll never give it back. The final question which I sort of have for you is, are you ready for a second lockdown? What happens if that was there? What would you do better? What would you do differently? I think we just need to be prepared for that. Hopefully there will be the recovery, but there may not be. And I think that's important to remember. So with that, I think I've spoken for far too long. Yeah, sorry, I've gone over by 5 minutes. And I'm going to pass over to Mark.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Fascinating. Thank you very much. Try and get the slides up as well. It's interesting, isn't it? As an owner of the business as well, and about what Jack's talking about, and in terms of getting people back to work, and all the other things he's talked about. We've had one guy, office manager, on his own now for 12 weeks in the office, dealing with all our day-to-day running of the business and making sure the post works, and now looking at perspex and the 2-meter signs and one-way systems. It's something we never thought we'd all go through, but we're still here and we're still ticking over, which is great. Just before I go on to my slides, I just reminded me of another point that Jack made as well, in terms of having to be experts about COVID-19. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a very nice venue in Newbury with an accountant and a bank doing a presentation about Brexit, and the Brexit expert who gave the first talk, I think his first line was, "This is my first Brexit," which I thought was kind of pertinent at the time. And I guess we're all in the same boat now in terms of our first COVID-19 global pandemic. So we're learning as we go along, but I found that really, really useful. So thank you, Jack. As I said earlier on, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We will make sure you get those answered. You'll also get a copy of the slides and a recording of this as well. So please participate if you'd like anything from us. So without further ado, let's just move on here. So in terms of us and what we're going to cover today, we're looking at who are Beaufort, which I think quite a few of you will already be aware of, so I'll try not to dwell on that too much. Protecting you and your business for the long term, the road ahead, and most importantly, as we talk about on a day-to-day basis, building a plan for you, which again Jack alluded to, for you and your business. Beaufort, I'm delighted, Beaufort Financial in Reading, I'm delighted to say celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year. So last week there were lots of celebrations, as much as they could be on Zoom. And again, thank you for everyone who stuck by us, our connections, our clients. We really wouldn't be here without you, and the business has grown and thriving, so that's very much down to you. As such as Phillips and a number of other companies, we focus on long-term relationships. That's how we build our business. We do with transactions, but our most important role is to get people from where they are now to where they'd like to get to, and that's by far the most satisfying piece of the job. We're doing a lot of work on Zoom now, obviously, which is great. We can still be in touch with our clients, but I must say I do miss the day-to-day contact of seeing clients and seeing them get to where they need to get to. So Jack mentioned unprecedented times. Everyone's using that phrase at the moment, and obviously the difference with this crisis has been the fact that we didn't see it coming. We had no time to prepare for that, and markets and companies have clearly been affected over the very short term. And certainly our clients have gone from being relatively positive about the markets to scared stiff to somewhere in the middle now, probably a bit more neutral, and possibly looking at opportunities for the long term in terms of markets being slightly undervalued as where they were compared to their previous highs. Really interesting. I'm sure most of you know who this guy is. Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, only as recently as a couple of days ago, says there now appears to be signs that the economy is coming back into life, which obviously is great with shops beginning to reopen. I can't imagine anything worse than standing in a queue for a shop right now, but there you go. I've just seen Greggs are opening 800 new stores, so 800 stores. So with sausage rolls, we're back, which is fantastic. And hairdressers, I think a lot of people are looking forward to that in July as well. So things are slowly returning to some form of normal, and it's great to hear that from the top. And Jack mentioned this as well in terms of we've done quite a few of these webinars over the last few weeks, and what we found obviously is that one size does not fit all. We had a comment a couple of weeks ago that now is not the right time to sell a business. I think that's very difficult to say that. I've certainly dealt with a number of clients of late who are actually thriving in this environment. We know one guy, a local businessman, who's managed to provide Heathrow, for example, with all the local perspex, which is a fantastic opportunity for him and his business. Others, by the same token, again, local businesses have come to a halt. You think about hospitality, hotels in the local area as well, have literally had to deal with no one coming to stay anymore. But I think it's been interesting in terms of, you think about pubs, you think about restaurants and how they've, I suppose, amended what they do to think about takeaway services. And some of those businesses are making more money now than they were before, again, as Jack mentioned previously. So it's about being fluid, being agile, being able to make changes as you go along. And the firms that can deal with this now and make those changes certainly will be there for the long term and see opportunities going forward as well. We've certainly had to do that as our business. Everything was done face to face. Everything was paper based. Lots of time traveling in the car to and from meetings, which in reality was probably dead time. We've certainly had a lot of time back and possibly can be more efficient in terms of dealing with our clients. So I think Zoom and virtual meetings long term will definitely be part of our offering going forward. So the thing to think about really is, how has your business changed? What are the opportunities? Has it been a positive or a negative impact on that? Do you now know who your key staff are? Did you know that before? Have your long-term plans been affected as a business and as a business owner? And importantly, again, as Jack alluded to earlier on, now's the time to think about everything, to review what you have, to review your costs across the board. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail now. Again, please do ask any questions. I see Sylvia's put a message on here, which we'll come back to in a second. So as a business owner, obviously we don't have the, I suppose, the benefit of the things that a company would normally provide an employee with in terms of benefits, whether it's income protection, pensions, life cover, death in service, and so on. So it's very much down to us to provide those benefits to ourselves. But one of the advantages being a limited company in particular is that you can do this via the business. A great deal of those things can be provided by the business, not have a tax problem for yourself individually, but also save the company corporation tax. So a kind of win-win situation. If we start on this as a company director, a lot of people, majority of our clients, I presume, would have a mortgage of some description, probably was required to take out some form of life cover in the past. And that's standard practice, nothing wrong with that at all. However, a lot of directors aren't aware of the fact that the company can provide that life cover for them, sometimes at a greater degree, a multiple of salary, for example, and that can be provided by the company. The policy is held in trust for the benefits of his family or her family and financial dependents. It does not go back into the company, actually goes to their next of kin. There's no tax issues with this at all in terms of the money's being received by the beneficiaries. There's no tax implications for them. And really importantly, this isn't a P11D benefit. There's no income tax to pay on this. The company pays this and it is treated as a business expense. Therefore, the company saves corporation tax. So we would encourage, and we do often encourage all our director clients, company directors, to look at their individual life policies and work out whether it's an efficient way of actually tweaking what they've got, but still maintaining a level of cover, possibly sometimes more. One thing that's happened with life cover over the last few years is that the premiums have reduced significantly. And because we're all living longer, we're going to do some seminars in the future about people living 100 years plus. I believe 1 in 3 people alive now will live to over 100, which is quite a scary thought, I guess, but it's a long way to go. But because of that, insurance providers have reduced the level of premiums payable for life cover. And just a few examples here you can see. I'm not going to run through these in terms of the cost that you might be thinking about paying for life cover. Also importantly, again, in terms of protecting your shareholders, what would happen if one of your shareholders unfortunately passed away? How would that affect your business? What would happen? Would the surviving spouse be part of the business? Would you want them to be part of your business? And how would that affect the company going forward? A very simple way of making sure this doesn't happen is to have a shareholder protection policy, which in essence is a life policy for the value of the shares that is taken out either by the company or the remaining shareholders. And again, that lump sum would be provided to the surviving spouse, and that would pay for them to, I guess, no longer be part of the business, but also be entitled to what obviously their partner has worked so very hard for along the way. So again, very inexpensive, something to think about. These are not life-changing premiums we should be talking about, and obviously very much based on the value of the business. So each company will be different on that. Again, I've given some premiums here, but we can discuss this in more detail. Life cover is not expensive. And then the final one would be, and I think this is really important now, certainly over the last 3 months we've thought about, and again, probably prior to that, who are your key staff? Who are the people that would have a big impact on your business if they weren't around? Obviously, company directors could be there, but would it be your key salesperson? Would it be your office manager? Would it be your sales director? You can almost think about a number of different areas there. And what impact would that have on your business if they weren't around? Very simple, again, to organise some form of cover that in essence pays a lump sum into the business, which covers the loss to the business over the period of time that you try and find a replacement, and gives you time to breathe. Certainly something that we would consider. And again, company directors in particular that we deal with, we're very fortunate to deal with a number of companies and individuals, and these be the first kind of area we'd go to. Protect what you have, protect those closest to you, and then we can move on from there. And every single one of our clients has been through this process with us in terms of building a plan, whether they're starting off looking to save for a house deposit. We've got clients who are 2021 just starting off on that process, as opposed to clients the other end of the scale who are looking to protect their inheritance and their estate planning. And selling a business certainly factors into that area as well. So every single one of our clients will go through this process. And again, really importantly, and by far the best bit of the job, is the fact that everyone's different. One size does not fit all, which makes it perfect for us to understand our clients. So in this example, we're going to talk about Alan and Carol. Alan and Carol are business owners, and they own a trampoline factory, trampoline warehouse, which has been a good source of income for them for the long term. But they're at the stage now where they're thinking about possibly selling the business and looking to retire around 60. They have 3 children, they own a home, they've got assets and liabilities, as we all do. And again, we'll make sure you get copies of these slides. But really, broadly speaking, what comes in goes out again. And they use the business to fund their lifestyle in one way, shape or form. They like their holidays, and why not? But they also have children to fund education fees and school fees long term as well. So it's quite an expensive time for them, and they're clearly looking to the future to see how they can make their finances work for them. So on this timeline, what we do is we start from the day we meet them up until the day they close their eyes or move upstairs, call it what you will. And we base all our clients on between 90 and 100. We agree that with them at the outset. And we'll ask them for certain timelines, whether it's school fees, university planning, retirement, house deposits. I've got 4 daughters, so things like weddings form a big area for me long term. Hopefully not for a long time yet, but anyway, those sorts of things are factored in. Clearly, I think more and more people now are thinking about helping their children with house deposits now, possibly as some form of inheritance early rather than later on. And again, we would encourage you to test your model, test your finances to see if these things are things that are possible and things that you'd like to do. So again, every single one of our clients is different. And what this shows you here is, just to dwell on the colours, if you see blue, or if you see blue, then there aren't any shortfalls. If you see red, then what we're saying is there would be a shortfall of some description. So based on their current expenditure never changing, basing on Alan and Carol helping their children through university and house deposits and so on, they get to 78 years old before they run out of liquid cash. So they've used their pensions, they've used their state pensions, they've used everything else that comes through here. But as of 78, they'd have to rethink, possibly downsize, and try and find liquid assets to continue their standard of living. Now, you know, does anyone expenditure stay the same for 28 years? I suggest it's highly unlikely. Does life stay the same for 28 years? I suggest that's highly unlikely, particularly we can all experience what we're going through today and the last 3 months. So this is very much a fluid model and something we review on an annual basis, but you can see it gives us a good ballpark understanding of, you know, what would happen in their current circumstances. And then what we can show them is in terms of what they may need to have in order to get rid of that red. So we've worked out that if they were to retire at 60 and sell their business at 60, if they got £1 million, just over £1 million from their business, then there wouldn't be any issues. They could leave that money in the bank. That would cover any shortfall for their foreseeable future, and actually their pensions that would then last them to the end of their life. And there would be some form of estate left over for their children, properties and so on. So a very simple way of doing this, and again, that gives some peace of mind. We don't value businesses. We're not here to do that. Obviously, working with Jack and other connections would do that for us, your accountant, your solicitor, but we can give you an idea of what you need. Now, if you know your business is worth £2 million and you've planned for the future, you've looked at where you are, and you only need £1 million, that negotiation process can certainly be a lot easier from your perspective. If you know you need 5 million and your business is only worth 2, then there's a broader discussion as well. So you can see this does give some peace of mind, and that's really got to be our job and has been over the last 3 to 6 months. You know, markets fell by pretty much 30%. People were, I guess, scared to contact us. We've been on the front foot and made sure we've contacted them. We've made sure that we are making sure we review our clients, making sure they understand what they have, and most importantly, showing them that things aren't as bad as they thought. And that's really important. Most of the clients we saw last year, who we're now talking to this year, have either made between 3 and 4% or stood broadly still in terms of their investments. So I understand there's a lot of bad news out there, but be assured things aren't always as bad as you seem. Just a couple of more points. I'm very much aware of the time, so I won't dwell on this too much, but another really efficient way of making the company work for you is via pension contributions. Pensions have never been as flexible. Any company contribution is treated as a business expense again, so therefore is a corporation tax saving. And there's a whole range of things, excuse me, that you can invest into. So in terms of going from stocks and shares all the way up to a commercial property. Will we need commercial properties going forward? Of course we will. Will there be opportunities? Potentially. And your business, so the pension would have the opportunity to buy premises for your business to work from. So that's certainly something to bear in mind. So in terms of what you should be doing as a business, I think it's most important to be tax efficient. Look at options in terms of what you have in place already. And if possible, use things that qualify for corporation tax relief. Now is the time to have a think about those things. And certainly, if we have time to breathe and think about our options, then we're certainly here for you to help you do that. Also, I'd really encourage you to think about your shareholder agreement, lasting power of attorney, and business lasting power of attorney. review your insurances, and also your protection. Similar to what Jack alluded to earlier on, just because we have relationships, that's great, but actually, are those documents still valid? Do they still work for us? Are they the most attractive in the market? And now's a great time to be thinking about those things. And importantly, remember, you're not on your own. I think it's very difficult when we're tucked away at home in our offices and trying to keep in touch with the outside world, that there are people out there who can help us, people who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and also people who can help you plan for your future. Your accountant should certainly be talking to you on a regular basis. Business coaches, Dave Gammon, we've worked with a lot in the past as well, insurance brokers. I won't drag through all these HR professionals. There's a variety of these people logged on today, and I know they're very keen to help clients any way they can. So delighted to help if you can. So collaboration is the most important thing we do. I think if you have people who come from different professions trying to score points off each other, then the client is the one that's affected the most. If you can work as a team, you'll get by far the better result, and you'll all know where you're trying to get to, which is really what the client is paying you for in the first place. And I saw this slide, which I thought was interesting in terms of great leaders never stop learning. The last few years, we talked to our chairman recently, and I think over the last 20 years, there have been 3 or 4 significant market crises in terms of, there was the credit crunch, before that there was a dot-com bubble. We can go and sort of look at these in the past, but we've come through these and we've survived them, and we're still here today. And the markets have made money for people over that period of time as well, surprisingly. But if you have a plan, this isn't about taking risk. This is about making sure you're on track to where you need to get to. If your turnover has fallen by 10%, will you get that 10% back? If your investments have fallen by 10%, will you go back from there as well? And will there be opportunities for you? That's the thing I've taken away from the last few weeks in particular. I think there will be companies and individuals who think now's the time to do something else. Maybe I don't need to go through this anymore. Alternatively, there are companies who still want to acquire other firms and will have opportunities to do so. So I think there's a lot to think about. We are very much here to help you as we can. I've tried to sort of whistle stop through that because I'm conscious of time. It's 11 o'clock. But I'd be delighted to answer any questions. I know Jack's around as well, and we can take things from there. So, Jack, we've got a question from Sylvia. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out how to turn everything on. Am I back?
You're back in the room.
So, Sylvia, I think the answer is quite clear on this one. No, it won't cover the pylon, because you have to be, furlough will only cover existing employees. So if you've got someone's termination date has occurred, then they're no longer an employee, so you won't be able to recover the furlough pay. So it's better for people to work, so to speak, or furlough their note for the whole notice period rather than pylon. I think the thing to point out to individuals, if they are still furloughed for their notice period, is that they're still allowed to go and get work elsewhere. So that doesn't prevent them, so they could still sort of double dip, so to speak. That's it.
We've got another question coming from, or 2 questions coming. Sylvia said thank you. This is great. You're very welcome. And Nikki's typing as well now.
The suspense.
It's going to be a long question. How's the rain in Winchester?
It's finally stopped, and my son didn't start crying all the way through all of this. So Katie, my wife's clearly done a good job this morning.
Success. Nikki's still typing. Does anyone else have any questions before we log off? We'll certainly provide you with all the slides we mentioned and a recording of this. I'm not quite sure what Nikki's question's taken quite a long time. Just give 2 more minutes. No, I think we've gone away. Jack, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just think it's probably just a case of trying to get through all of this. Keep an eye on your cash flow. That's the most important thing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And from our perspective, things aren't as bad as they seem. There's what I take away from it. We're talking to a lot of clients, and yeah, they're nowhere near as bad as they seem. If you believed everything you heard, you'd be really worried about what's happening. But no, the markets have bounced back slightly, and also as long as you have that plan in place, we can deal with the ups and downs along the way. So yeah, don't panic. We're going to be fine. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for Jack for presenting, and fingers crossed we'll all speak to you again soon. So take care, look after yourselves, and I hope you and your families are all keeping well.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.